Dragon Ball as a series is filled with so many iconic arcs, and some of them are even in discussion for being amongst the best arcs in anime and manga. But there is this one arc in Dragon Ball Z that just doesn't seem to have the same amount of praise as the previous ones, and I'm talking about the Buu Saga. The Buu Saga is one of the most popular sagas to have ever come out of Dragon Ball. The saga is filled with memorable and amazing moments that still hold up to this day. But as great as these moments were, I feel that compared to the previous arcs in Dragon Ball Z, the Buu Saga tends to be more disliked or just doesn't receive the amount of love that the previous arcs have. Now, do I think the Buu Saga is trash? No. I actually think even with all of the issues and the inconsistencies, the Buu Saga is still a very great arc. Especially since there are worse arcs in the Dragon Ball franchise. And I mean much worse. So this video is going to go through the several problems of the Buu Saga and why people deem it as Dragon Ball Z's worst saga. So the first glaring issue of the Buu Saga is simply how the saga even came about. The beginning of the Buu Saga starts out with Gohan starting high school and how he tries to balance his school life with his heroic life of being the Great Saiyaman. And then we move into the World Tournament, which is where we see Spopovich, which leads into the Supreme Kai taking the Z Fighters to Babidi's base. And the reason why Supreme Kai needed their help was because Majin Buu was sealed by Babidi in a capsule and it was left on Earth. So this whole time, for millions of years, Majin Buu was sealed on planet Earth. And it just felt a bit too convenient for the story, since out of all of the planets in the galaxy, Majin Buu just happens to be sealed on the same planet where the main characters reside. So he starts off with Gohan going to high school where he meets Videl, and because she found out his identity, she threatened to expose Gohan's identity if he doesn't participate in a Tenkaichi Budokai tournament. Then Spopovich and Yamu happen to also participate in that tournament to gather energy for Majin Buu, who happened to be sealed on planet Earth this whole time. This sequence of events for the plot just all happened out of convenience and it didn't feel natural. And the whole storyline of the Great Saiyaman and Gohan being in high school pretty much went nowhere once Spopovich gets introduced. We don't see the Great Saiyaman for the rest of the Buu Saga once the tournament begins. But looking at previous sagas, the sequence of events didn't just happen out of convenience. The Saiyan saga starts out with Raditz trying to recruit Goku because Goku is a Saiyan who was sent to Earth, so it was only a matter of time before Raditz eventually comes to get him. Then after Raditz was defeated, his counter transmitter was still on, so Vegeta and Nappa knew about the Dragon Balls and they made their way to Earth. Then to bring everyone back to life, they decide to go to Namek because Nappa talked about how there were Namekian Dragon Balls, which was a good bit of foreshadowing there. And this leads directly into the Namek saga, and the whole reason why Frieza was on planet Namek was because he overheard the conversation about using the Dragon Balls for immortality when Vegeta and Nappa were on Earth. Which is exactly what happened when Vegeta and Nappa overheard Raditz and Piccolo's conversation at the beginning of the Saiyan saga. And then in the Android saga, the reason why Dr. Gero created the androids was because he wanted to take revenge for Goku for taking down the Red Ribbon Army during the OG portion of Dragon Ball. And Goku did say that he left some of the Red Ribbon Army soldiers alive, so it does make sense that one of them would at least make a return. That's why Dr. Gero creating androids in the future didn't feel random for the sake of the plot, because it tied back to a previous arc in the series. But with the Buu Saga, there was two plotlines happening at the same time. Gohan in high school and joining the tournament to keep his identity, and Babidi gathering energy to awaken Majin Buu, who was sealed on Earth for many years. And both plotlines just happened to meet up at the tournament. There was no connection between them. It would have made more sense if the Supreme Kai would instead try and meet up with Gohan and his other Z Fighters at the beginning, before the beginning of the tournament, to try and help him to stop Babidi from unsealing Majin Buu. But instead, they all just happen to see each other at the tournament, and that is where Supreme Kai asks for their help. And this does hurt the quality of the saga, because it shows there was little to no planning when it came to how this saga was going to unfold. And I know Toriyama wasn't a writer who planned way too far ahead, because he was more of a discovery writer. But even from the King Piccolo saga all the way to the Namek saga, you could tell there was some planning involved, which is why those sagas flowed nicely. Another issue I have with the Buu Saga is the involvement of Goku. Now, coming from how the Cell saga ended, Goku sacrificed himself to save his friends and his family, passing on the torch to his son Gohan to be the new protector of Earth. This was consistent with the OG portion of the story, where Roshi passed on the torch to his students of the Turtle School. And even Toriyama himself stated that he planned for Gohan to become the new main character after Goku's death. This was evident when you look at the beginning of the Buu Saga, where it focused on Gohan starting high school and trying to keep his identity a secret. And then you have the introduction of Goten and Kid Trunks in the story, who had massive potential as kids. So it seemed like they were going to be the new main characters in this new era of Dragon Ball after Goku's death. But then once Goku comes back during the tournament, Goku starts to get more focus again and becomes more heavily involved in the fight against Majin Buu. It was fine when he was first brought back because he was only back for 24 hours, but then he trades his life with the Elder Kai to be resurrected permanently. And then at the end, it ended up being Goku to be the one to deal the final attack against Kid Buu with the Spirit Bomb, even though Gohan was supposed to have become the main character now. And this just made the training that Gohan, Goten and Trunks were undergoing, like Gohan using the Z-Sword and getting his potential unlocked, and Goten and Trunks learning how to fuse, kind of pointless, since those three were meant to be the main faces of the Buu Saga to defeat Majin Buu without the help of Goku and Vegeta. But instead, they were killed by Kid Buu, leaving Goku and Vegeta to be the ones to work together in destroying Kid Buu. So I think this decision in bringing Goku back in the Buu Saga not only undermined the training and progress that Gohan, Goten and Trunks were undergoing, but it also went against the theme of passing on the torch that was consistent with the original Dragon Ball.
Not a great plan.
And speaking of Gohan, Goten and Trunks' training, this leads into my next point about how most of the forms and new techniques introduced in the Buu Saga ended up not doing much for the plot. And I'm mainly talking about Super Saiyan 3 Goku, Gotenks, and Ultimate Gohan. Normally, whenever we have a new transformation or a new technique in Dragon Ball, they always did something that majorly impacted the plot. When Goku went Super Saiyan on Namek, Gohan and Bulma were able to escape Namek, and Goku defeated Frieza by the end. When Gohan went Super Saiyan 2, he killed the Cell Juniors who were beating up the Z Fighters, and then he defeated Perfect Cell, marking the end of the Cell Saga. Even in the Saiyan Saga, when Goku learned the Kaioken, he defeated Nappa, and against Vegeta, he won the beam struggle against him, forcing Vegeta to transform into a Great Ape, which majorly impacted the fight. But then let's look at how the Buu Saga utilizes forms. Super Saiyan 3 was never built up as well as Super Saiyan and Super Saiyan 2 were. Now as a form, Super Saiyan 3 does make sense, because if Super Saiyan 2 was meant to be the next level of a Super Saiyan, then it makes sense why Super Saiyan 3 would be the next level after that. The problem is the lack of build up for this form, when there were times in the Buu Saga where Goku could have hinted at achieving Super Saiyan 3. He could have hinted towards it at the tournament, or even beforehand when he was training on King Kai's planet. So it seems like Super Saiyan 3 came out of nowhere and was used as shock value when Goku revealed it. Because when you go to the fight between Goku and Majin Vegeta, Goku says that he does not want his energy to transfer to Majin Buu, so he needed to end the fight as quickly as possible. But if he had just used Super Saiyan 3 right there, he would have beaten Vegeta easily, and the energy from the fight wouldn't have been transferred to Majin Buu. And I know Goku explains his reasoning, but their main priority was to prevent the awakening of Majin Buu. And Super Saiyan 3 didn't really move the plot or accomplish anything major compared to the previous Super Saiyan forms. Unlike the previous forms, it never defeated the main villain, a nice part of what made them so impactful in the series. The form was only used to buy time for Trunks to get the Dragon Radar, and Goku did use Super Saiyan 3 against Kid Buu at the end, but he didn't win. It was the Spirit Bomb, a move that was introduced in the Saiyan Saga, that ended up defeating Kid Buu, so Super Saiyan 3 felt kinda pointless for the most part. Then with Gotenks, the fusion dance was first mentioned by Goku when they were trying to figure out how to beat Majin Buu, and because Goku went back to the afterlife, Vegeta died because of his sacrifice and Gohan was assumed to be dead. It was down to Goten and Trunks to be the new protectors of Earth. They had to go for an entire training arc learning the fusion dance and keeping their energies in sync so they could fuse successfully. But then once we get Gotenks, he didn't really accomplish anything. He could also transform into a Super Saiyan 3, so that would have been the best way for Super Saiyan 3 to have been useful in the Buu Saga. It would have been hitting two birds with one stone. But Gotenks ended up being absorbed by Super Buu and does nothing for the rest of the saga, when he could have been involved in the final fight against Kid Buu. And the same also applies for Ultimate Gohan. Gohan literally spent hours and hours getting his potential unlocked by the Elder Kai, only for him to also get absorbed by Buu-Tengs, and that was not even present during the final fight against Kid Buu. Because as I mentioned earlier, Gohan was meant to be the main character of the Buu Saga, and they did a good job at building up his strength, like when he was training to wield the Z-Sword, and then getting his potential unlocked. And everyone thought that Gohan was dead, so his entrance against Super Buu was one of the best moments in the saga because of how well Gohan was being built up and showing us why he is now the main character. Just like how Goku would always have his cool entrances to fight the main villain, and this was Gohan's moment to replicate that, but sadly we didn't get the payoff. So Super Saiyan 3, Gotenks and Ultimate Gohan ended up not doing much for the story, which was never a problem when looking at previous arcs in Dragon Ball. Vegito seemed to be the only fusion that actually accomplished something by letting himself get absorbed and saving Gotenks, Gohan and Piccolo from Super Buu's body, and Vegito was a Potara fusion, which wasn't nearly as built up as well as the fusion dance was, and yet the Potara fusion accomplished more than the fusion dance did.
That just makes no fucking sense.
Now this next issue isn't anything too major, but I think Majin Buu as a villain just wasn't as enjoyable as Frieza and Cell were. I still think Majin Buu is a great villain, and seeing Kid Buu just being an absolute menace was very entertaining to see, but I think because he lacked speech, He just didn't have the same charisma and great personality that Frieza, Cell, Saiyan Saga Vegeta, and King Piccolo did. Super Buu did fix this issue for the most part, because he could speak, and I think Gohan and Buu were very charismatic once they absorbed Piccolo's intelligence, but that was only present for a small portion of the saga. Buu and Gohan had less screen time than the Fat Buu and Kid Buu, and with Fat Buu, I don't think he had the same screen presence or the same fear factor like the other villains that came before him did, and Fat Buu is meant to be one of the final villains of Dragon Ball Z. I think it was due to his comedic nature and his goofy character design, and how he acts very childish when he doesn't get his way. I get that Dragon Ball has a lot of comedy, but he always managed to balance the seriousness and the humour. And because of the wackiness and the comedic elements of Majin Buu's abilities, whenever he would kill people by turning them into chocolate and sweets, you'll have a harder time taking it seriously and it feels like there were less stakes. And no, it's not because the Dragon Balls will just bring them back, because when you look at character deaths in previous sagas, they always added weight to them. Like both of Krillin's deaths, Future Trunks' death from the Cell Saga, and the Z Fighter's deaths from the Saiyan Saga. But when Super Buu killed everyone on Kami's lookout by turning them into chocolate, it just didn't add that same weight. Even in the original Dragon Ball, which has way more comedy and humour than Z does, even their villains were much scarier and they are much weaker than Majin Buu is. Why is it that Tao Pai Pai killing Upa's dad added more weight than Super Buu turning Chi-Chi into an egg? And this last issue I have with the Buu Saga is the characterization of the Supreme Kai. The Supreme Kai has been mocked and seen as a fraud by the Dragon Ball community for a long time now, and the Buu Saga is mostly to blame for this. The Supreme Kai had a great introduction in the tournament. He was very mysterious and he gave the vibes of a villain which kept you guessing if he was a friend or a foe. Then when he faces off against Piccolo in the tournament, Piccolo instead forfeits the match because he knew instantly that he was no match for him. This again builds up more excitement for this character, and then we get the reveal that he is the Supreme Kai who has authority over even the Grand Kai himself. We get statements like how the Supreme Kais are way stronger than Frieza himself, but then as the Buu Saga unfolds, he doesn't really do much to live up to this hype. He spends most of the time constantly talking about how scary Majin Buu is, and because he was weaker than Goku, Vegeta and Gohan, it makes it harder to take him seriously, even though he is supposed to have more authority than all the divine beings introduced thus far. When we look at the previous divine beings in Dragon Ball, they were written a lot better and were taken more seriously. Korin had a divine water, but when he first meets Goku, it took Goku 3 days to finally match his speed and retrieve the water from him. Mr. Popo was pretty much untouchable when Goku first meets him, and Kami teaches Goku for the next 3 years in preparation for his fight against Piccolo. King Kai was way stronger than Goku when they first met, because Goku was weaker than Raditz, and King Yama, one of King Kai's students, easily beat Raditz when he moved to the afterlife. And King Kai also taught Goku 2 new techniques, which were great additions to his moveset. Even in Dragon Ball Super, Beerus and Whis were way above Goku when they were first introduced, and Whis is still teaching Goku about Ultra Instinct. But with the Supreme Kai, he was actually weaker than Goku since his introduction, which never used to be the case since every other divine being was stronger than Goku when he first meets them. And then the Elder Kai gets introduced later on in the story, and he did more in the Buu Saga than the current Supreme Kai did. Instead, the Supreme Kai would constantly get scolded for not doing his job well and being belittled by the Elder Kai.
This nigga is trash!
And those were the issues with the Buu Saga that kept it from having the same quality as what came before it. And I think the reason for this dip in quality was because of Toriyama's situation when he was writing the Buu Saga. It was confirmed in an interview that Toriyama actually intended to end the series of the Cell Saga, but his editorial team convinced him to continue for one more saga. So maybe Toriyama just wasn't as motivated and was most likely burnt out from writing Dragon Ball for so many years. It was stated that he wanted to shift the tone from being too serious and complex like the Cell and the Frieza sagas to being more comedic like Dr. Slump. And this explains the comedic tone of the Buu Saga, and the reason for this comedic tone was because Toriyama grew tired of the serious tone that he wrote for many years, and making the Buu Saga more comedic was the only way to make his work more enjoyable, and he knew that the series was ending, so he didn't care anymore. So maybe if Toriyama wasn't so burnt out and still enjoyed writing his manga, the Buu Saga could have been written a lot better. Thank you guys so much for watching, and what are your thoughts on the Buu Saga? Do you think it's as good as the previous arcs, or do you think it could have been improved? And also, if you haven't already, please subscribe as it really helps the channel, and I'm trying to aim for 1000 subscribers by the end of the year. And I'll see you guys in the next video.